Today we have a returning guest who did a presentation with us in February on growing calm and connection in the face of conflict. And now we have her back here today doing a deeper dive into managing high conflict moments. Our special guest's name is Dr. Stacy Jones. Dr. Jones, my bad, specializes in treating trauma and has been studying trauma for over 15 years. She's been trained in EMDR for over 10 years. And she also does research on the neuroplasticity of the brain and in the role that bilateral movement plays in activating the right and left sides of the brain to enhance physical and emotional health. Over the past 13 years, Dr. Jones has worked with couples, families, and individuals from nearly every walk of life and with nearly every presenting concern imaginable. Just as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Jones's presentation is titled A Deeper Dive into Managing High Conflict Moments. You could be prepared to explore the neurophysiology of the stress response and break down the ways in which your body is a walking pharmacy. I love the way you put that. And the most powerful tool in breaking through intensive couple conflict. We'll bust some major myths about the role that conflict plays in calming the stress response and teach you and your partner how to use conflict to build couple connection and resilience. We're going to stop a couple times throughout this presentation where Dr. Jones will ask you questions and you can ask if you have questions and you can participate in the chat. And so it'll kind of be like a Q&A throughout, and then we'll do a little Q&A at the end as well. So you're welcome to use the chat. And this workshop is also approved for 1 continuing education credit by the UAMFT. There will be a survey that pops up at the end when you exit out of this webinar. And at the bottom of the survey, that's where you can request a CEU. So with that being said, I will turn the time over to Dr. Jones. You can take it away.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm super excited to be here with you guys. I really, really hope that you will ask questions, because one thing, I don't want this to be so much of a lecture. I really want it to be a discussion as much as possible. And so if there's any way I can kind of tailor fit what we're talking about to specific questions you guys have, that's a really high priority for me. So please feel free to roll those into the Q&A, and then Camille will she'll verbally let me know what questions to answer when we get to that 15-minute mark. So just really quick, a little bit more background on me. So I'm a marriage and family therapist by training. Been studying trauma, like I said, for a while. And I've developed kind of a stress management wearable. You put it on and it calms the brain. So I'm in the tech space and the neuroplasticity space. And I just say that because that's part of why there's so much emphasis on neurophysiology, is that's really like the world that I live in quite a bit. But so anyway, so I wanted to ask you a question. Have you ever had this kind of a moment in your relationship where you're wondering, okay, where's my white picket fence, right? We have all these hopes and these expectations when we get together with anybody. We have these expectations with our children, we have these expectations with our partners, and with those attachments in our lives, the people that are like really at the heartbeat of our lives. And we have these hopes and these expectations. And I don't know if you've ever found yourself wondering, hey, where's my white picket fence? Like, I did not see this one coming. This is not how I saw it roll out in my mind. I saw A, B, and C, and I'd have X, Y, and Z, and it's just so different. And so let's talk a little bit about where those differences come from. But one of the trickiest things about this in terms of attachment, and this all fuels into managing conflict, is that none of us start from scratch. My experience and what I've come to realize is that in terms of attachment, really what happens for all of us is that we inherit an attachment garden. What I mean by that is that there's the attachments, the way that people attach with one another. That has been growing for a long time in that family line. Attachment gardens are inherited, meaning they are literally passed on down through the generations. And it's typically 3 to 4 generations. And so, and the tricky thing about this is that people, there's a difference between how we treat one another when we're dating, or we're in kind of like that romantic phase of life versus, or the relationship, versus how we treat one another when we are actually attaching or attached. And so I don't know if you've had those experiences where you find either your partner or your loved one, your child, or you interacting with one another or with you in a way that's very surprising. Like it's just not in that spectrum of what you thought was going to be. And it's because the seeds for that were planted a long, long time ago. And the reason why I compare attachments to gardens is because they can be grown. The thing that's incredible about the brain is that it's neuroplastic. So it changes based off of experiences. It gets better at doing what it does a lot of, and it struggles with what it doesn't do very much of. So it's way more like a muscle than it is a machine. And so we tend to think of attachment as like it's in these different groups, right? We're either securely attached, or we're insecurely attached, or we have an anxious avoidant attachment. And the reality is that for all of us, the attachment tendencies that we have they're fluid. They can be grown, and they can also atrophy. And so let me go to the next slide, and I think this will make a little bit more sense. But the reality is that in terms of how attachments form within relationships is based off of one critical dynamic. And that critical dynamic is how the fight or flight response is managed around vulnerability. In essence, that's not the only dynamic that matters, of course, but it's a core dynamic in terms of attachment. So in essence, if I'm securely attached to you, they say, or if partners are securely attached to one another, that happens when there tends to be a lot of calm and connection and the presence of vulnerability. Or if things are trickier, what happens is that when people are vulnerable, that fight or flight response gets really, really activated, and people either push against or push away from that vulnerability. And there's patterns around this that get passed on down from generations. And so it's almost like there's a family recipe around this. And to kind of test this, I want you to ask yourself a question. How similar is your relationship with your partner to your parents' relationship to one another? Just ask yourself that question in terms of how you manage conflict, not in terms of personality styles, not in terms of, similarities or differences in terms of likes or dislikes, not even anything to do with any type of a value system, just in terms of how vulnerability and fight or flight is managed. I'm willing to bet that there's a lot of similarities between your parents' relationship with one another and how they responded to you in your fight or flight moments, and how you respond to your partner and to your children. And this is kind of like the intergenerational attachment map that gets passed on down. And there's a couple of reasons why it gets passed on down. And we'll talk a little bit about more of those reasons in a moment. And so, whoops, let me go ahead and see. I don't know if you guys can see that. So what I view vulnerability is, it's any type of distress. So sick, tired, stressed, overwhelmed, angry, betrayed, in pain, overwhelmed, any resistant, defiant, any type of distress. I kind of conceptualize that to be vulnerability. And so the way that we respond to these things, these vulnerable moments, we learn these in our families of origin and the families that we grew up in. Let's go to the next one. So the tricky thing and the confusing thing about this, to be honest, is that I think that conflict has a bad rap. It really does. Like we see conflict as something that it's not supposed to be present. And while I'm not a proponent of like, hey, let's build up conflict in your life, I found that conflict is not really one of those like shoulds or shouldn't be. It just simply is what it is. Like the reality is that when conflict is there, it's there. And it's past the point of whether it should be happening or it shouldn't be happening. And the really unique thing about conflict and with the brain is that it needs to offload it. And so when what happens is that with the brain, it gets to a certain level of stress where it's really to its threshold level. And everybody's threshold level is different because everyone's neurophysiology is very different. And it's really important to be aware of that for one another, because our threshold for stress is not going to be our partner's threshold for stress, or our children. Of course, we understand that our children's are going to be different than ours, but really everyone's neurophysiology is so unique. And so sometimes it's sensory stuff that builds up that tension and that distress. Sometimes it's work stress or whatever it is. But the reality is that when it gets to that threshold level, the brain really does need to offload it. And neurologically, there's benefit of offloading it. And so conflict is kind of tricky because it's gotten a bad rap in the sense of, in these moments when the brain is offloading stress, all we tend to perceive is something bad. Like this shouldn't be happening. And we have a strong fight or flight response to it. But the reality is that it needs to offload it. It's a biological need. Children need to cry. Teens are going to be angry and upset, and how they offload it, we kind of hope for the best, but the reality is that if it doesn't offload it, it's going to continue to build. Because in so many ways, the neurological system is like the weather system. It's so interesting how many similarities there are between the weather patterns and our brains. But this slide kind of is about the movement of the weather patterns. And what I found is that right here, we are, we're taught to believe that this is what happy relationships look like. This is what we should aim for. And that this is where connection is built. It is right here in the sunny skies, where everything's happy and everything's calm. And that's when we know relationships are successful, is right here. But the reality actually, because of how vulnerability and attachment intersect, is that actually right here in the storms of life, this is when connection is built. And so in terms of a storm, it's the movement of distress through the neurological system that creates a healthy neurological system. And so storms, lightning and thunder, that hopefully turns into rain, that hopefully clears things out and turns it into blue sky until the stress of life builds back up and it's got to offload it again. This is the rolling through the patterns that creates a healthy neurological system, not perpetual blue skies. And the reality is connection is built in the storms and enjoyed in the calm. We don't build very much here, actually. This is where we enjoy things, but this is where attachments are built. And so that's 15-minute mark. Kendall, do you have any questions so far about anything?
I don't have any questions in the chat so far, but yeah, just a reminder, if anyone has questions throughout, you're welcome to ask them in the chat and I will read them out to Dr. Jones.
Okay, awesome, no problem.
But yeah, go ahead and keep going and I'll let you know if a question pops in.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so, and again, this is one other thing going back really quickly. This is something that we don't tend to really grow out of right here. We don't tend to grow out of the need to offload. There's a difference. There's a really cool saying. It's by Gordon Neufeld. And it's not in my presentation. If you want me to email you the reference for this, I'm more than happy to do that. But he said that there's a difference between we all grow old. We all don't grow up. And the reality is that we grow up to the extent to which we feel tuned into and connected with in the presence of our storms. And so ironically, in those moments when conflict is just kind of like, it's just flying all over the place, it can feel like those are very unproductive moments, and moments when there's a lot of regression. But it's interesting because sometimes, and this is kind of consistent across the life course, when there's a moment of neurological growth, there's also a lot of behavioral difficulties. And so again, even within the brain, growth mode isn't typically blue sky. That's where growth is enjoyed. But when we're dealing with neurological growth and transition and change, things tend to get a little bit dicey.
All right, I actually have a question from a participant who says, how can we offload stress in a healthy way?
Yeah, okay, so the healthiest way, the biggest thing we want to avoid a couple of different stages in this process, right? So the first thing that we want to avoid is perpetual brewing of a storm. I wish we had so much more time, but the reality is that conflict that's kept at bay all the time, we don't talk about it. We don't actually let me go to this next stage, this next slide, because it really demonstrates that. And I'm trying to figure out how do I minimize this? So, okay, well, I'll just kind of go with that. Hopefully it's not too distracting, but so in essence, there's three core responses to vulnerability. So again, those moments, right? When the brain is neurologically is at a place where it's got to offload some of the stress. We tend to either turn against it, which is when there's fighting. We turn away from it, which is flighting it. So this is fight or flight. Or we turn towards it, which is, it says acceptance, but really it's more empathy. If we can turn towards an empathy in the face of conflict, you can change the conflict. And so in terms of offloading, that question of how do you offload in healthy ways, the goal is that we're always, as we're growing these parts of our brain, because these parts of our brain are literally grown. We grow them as we do them, and as we engage and connect with people in the presence of our conflict. That's how you grow these parts of our brain. And so as we learn to eventually move more and more towards empathy, towards ourselves and towards our partners in the face of conflict, then we learn to offload our conflict in more empathetic ways, in ways that are going to be a little bit less lightning, a little bit less intensity, or if there is lightning and intensity, it's for shorter durations, and we can rebound quicker from it. So in essence, the answer to that question is that you learn to offload conflict, and you teach other people to do it too, as you infuse empathy into the conflict. And again, that's the whole approach of returning towards that conflict with openness and empathy, instead of turning against it or turning away from it. And we're doing this both with ourselves and with others.
I have two more questions.
Yes.
One is kind of a follow-up question to what you just said, saying, how do you offload when you are in the storm to avoid fight or flight?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the other question, which we can cover after, is she said, you mentioned neurology growth. Can that happen at any age?
Yes, absolutely. That's the incredible thing about the brain. I think one thing that they always fear, honestly, in our relationships is like, did I miss the boat? Like, have I missed the bus? Are we too far gone? Are we too far past? And the answer will always be no, you're not. You're not. I've worked with people of all ages, and attachment is a biological need. We never grow out of it. And in fact, the argument is that we need more than food. And I've seen that with people. We need it more than food. We need it more than shelter. I have seen people risk food and risk shelter for attachment. Do stuff that just absolutely puts them in harm's way because they need attachment so badly. And so we never grow out of this need. And our brain always has the capacity to grow in a way that to become safer and more safely attached. I don't like to consider safe attachment as like this ultimate destination. I think all of us we're kind of like driving towards it. We're growing that part of our garden, watering it, or we're not. But it's not like we've either arrived or that we've missed the boat. All of us we're in this journey trying to get more like closer and closer to it. And then that other question of how, can you remind me, I'm sorry, one more time, the question about how do you offload stress?
Yes. How do you offload when you are in the storm to avoid fight or flight?
Okay, the best thing you can do, honestly, is if we go back to this one, you don't want to spend a lot of time in the lightning and the thunder. So what that looks like is and this is part of why it's so important to infuse empathy, is because empathy is usually, I've seen this so consistently. Empathy is what moves it from anger to tears, from anxiety to sadness. Like part of the way that you can offload your stress in a way that avoids conflict is kind of turning towards those deeper emotions and allowing them to flow. And actually, we're going to go a little bit more into the physiology, like we're going to break it down step by step in these next slides about exactly how you do that. And so anyway, I'm just kind of wondering really quick, if you could ask yourself, what kind of garden were you grown in, right? So all of us were grown in these gardens where when we were vulnerable or in any type of distress, people either turned against us, our caregivers, typically turned against, turned away, or turned towards. And when we can identify like what garden were we grown in, it really gives a lot of context as to why we respond the way that we respond. Because I don't know about you, but I know for me, responding in the way I want to in the moment of conflict is really hard to do. Like, I think it's even, I mean, people often ask me, well, I'm sure that because you're a therapist, you have the best relationships. And it's like, actually, I'm pretty aware of when I'm totally messing it up, right? Of like, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said that. I can't believe I just did that, because I know that I'm going to have to, we're going to have to work that one out again later. But so we have kind of like these innate tendencies, right? And those innate tendencies probably go against a lot of the logic that we have, but they come from the garden that we've grown in. And so I think there's it's important to kind of know what those tendencies were, because it helps us understand where ours come from. And this is also important to know that so your partner's responses to you really are kind of duplicates, almost replications of the types of responses people had to them, especially when they were young and vulnerable. So it's very much like control and copy. Like we very much duplicate what others did with us when we were young. And one thing that's important to know about this conflict, especially with partners, is that it's not typically a sign of love. The way that we resolve conflict actually, I mean, of course, love is involved, but it has way more to do with neurological wiring around those two core things: how the fight or flight response is managed in the presence of vulnerability. That dynamic right there has more to do, and how that was managed when they were young has more to do than probably anything else. Well, than a lot of other things in your relationship. Of course, there's all sorts of things like addiction and neurodivergence and a lot of things that play into this, but family patterns and histories are a big player. And same for you. Your responses to your partner are very similar to the responses people had to you when you were young and when you're vulnerable. So when you guys are dealing with conflict with one another, recognizing that, hey, this is like, we're in the middle of an attachment garden here. Like maybe there's this huge tree in the middle of it that we don't want to be there. We don't want it to be there. There's these tendencies that we wish were different. And recognizing that they come kind of like from inherited interaction patterns can give us some direction in regards to how do you change them. So we already kind of talked about this. So first thing we want to know, how do you manage conflict, right? That was that question. How do you manage conflict without, how do you manage offloading without creating a lot of conflict? First thing, you got to calm your body down. That's the first thing you've got to do. Managing conflict has honestly not very much to do with words, because when you're in very heated conflict, the part of your brain that processes language is typically offline. So if you've had conversations, or you've had arguments, you've had fights, you've had screaming matches, whatever that looks like, and you've noticed that whatever you say doesn't tend to make impact, it's literally because the part of the brain that's in charge of processing semantics does not work well when the fight or flight response is strong. So the reality is that we digest our way through conflict. Like we have to keep our body calm enough that it can even switch the networks within the brain that we're wanting to be on to be able to manage it. So before you try to find the right words to throw at your partner, or to open to your partner to get them to change, first step is always calm that body down. And let's talk a little bit about how to do that. So I kind of have this saying, you got to calm your body to prime your brain to change your mind. It really goes in this order. So again, you got to calm your body to change, to prime your brain. And in other words, it's kind of like driving a car where your brain is like, it's like driving a car that is a stick shift, and your brain is the neutral gear. If you want it to change gears, meaning that your thoughts are going to go somewhere else and your behavior is going to go somewhere else, you've got to be able to put the clutch. You've got to be able to push it into neutral so you can shift. You can't do that in a stressed body. The fight or flight response won't allow you to. So the first step is always calming that body down. Let's roll through some kind of hijacks to doing that. I think it's a little bit harder to do this, honestly, in conflict, because with partner conflict, because if you've noticed this with little kids, they're really good at this. They move their body when they're stressed out. They're jumping around, they're kicking, there's actually like neurological benefit to that. A calm body doesn't necessarily, and very rarely, translate into a calm mind. Our bodies were designed to move in the presence of stress. So if you are in a position where you can move your body in any way, and it's not going to like escalate the conflict, there's benefit in doing that. If you've got a conflict mode, that's why going on a walk can be helpful, because as you're walking, you're activating right, left, right, left, right, left, and you're getting blood flow and you're getting oxygen, and there's the smells and the textures, and you're activating different networks within your brain that help balance out some of that fight or flight response. If you're working, with kiddos, it's all about, can you wrestle, like in a safe way wrestle, or can you do some type of animal play or get some movement going somewhere. But if you can't move your body, other ways of calming your body, there's kind of two parts of your body that respond well, that kind of activate the parasympathetic parts of the brain. The first is like the head, the top of the head and the back of the neck. Honestly, kind of like rubbing those two areas can kind of help calm things down. That's why a lot of hairdressers end up being therapists, in the sense of like, we just unload our stress when we're getting our hair done, is because these parts activate the parasympathetic parts of the brain. Yawning can do it, any type of laughter, any type of humming, any type of singing. There's all sorts of different hijacks, but I would say maybe one of the most important is just your perception of the conflict. If you can convince yourself that there's maybe some benefit of this conflict. And maybe instead of an obstacle, maybe it's an invitation to actually engage on a deeper level and to form a connection. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that in the next few slides. How are we doing with questions, Camilla, or any others?
We have a couple more questions.
Okay.
I'll read one to you. So
Yeah.
one is, how do you change the family garden and dynamic, especially when there are high levels of conflict or emotion among those involved?
Yeah, awesome question. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about this down and later on the slide, but one of the biggest things you got to know about heirloom gardens is that, as you can imagine, stuff that's been growing for a long time, you can't just yank it out of there. But if you ask yourself, how helpful has it been if you've had a high conflict moment with your partner and you've told them that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing? Does that tend to escalate the conflict or diminish it? Most of the time, a lot of the time, when we try to yank out these behaviors that are occurring in the conflict, it's very much like trying to yank out a tree that's pretty deeply rooted. And we spend so much of our energy trying to yank it out that we don't have any energy to grow anything else in the garden, or to even like see any other part of the garden. And so a lot of it has to do, let me go break this down to like actual, a lot of it has to do with just infusing nurture and a connection and attachment instead of giving that behavior that we're not wanting a lot of attention. And some of these other steps are also going to be kind of part of how you change the dynamic. Let me go ahead and go to this next slide really quick, Mel, and then I'll take another question. So one of the things that's really important to you about keeping your body calm in the presence of conflict is you want to train your body that this conflict is manageable. That even if it gets pretty intense, if you can calm your body in the presence of it, it impacts your brain less. Let me go into this. Okay, so I think this is a little bit later on in the PowerPoint, but in case we don't have time to get to that point, part of why it impacts your brain is because if you can calm your body down, even when they're not, you are able to filter things, and what they're saying won't get wired in deep into your brain. The more that you're in fight or flight while they're in fight or flight, the more that they throw at you. And sometimes there's some pretty sharp shrapnel in these conversations or these conflicts. Whatever they throw at you is going to sink in deep. Because when you're in fight or flight, your capacity to filter things out, to take stuff with a grain of salt, to see the horizon, to not internalize everything, that's offline when you're in fight or flight. And so even if you don't know how to get the other person to calm down, if you can just calm your own body down, there's incredible benefit for your brain as it learns to have different stress associations with that person in conflict. So the first step is you want to calm your body down. The second is you want to seek safe, I call it safe physical proximity. So instead of jumping into a conversation about what needs to happen, which we tend to do, we're so verbal as adults. And sometimes that really backfires. And we spend so much energy being verbal that it's hard to have the energy to do anything else. But if you can step back and recognize that the reality is that your body is a walking pharmacy. So when you look at neurologically, what cuts down conflict, which in essence is, how do we slow down this adrenaline? How do we calm down this cortisol? What are the neurochemicals that help that happen? Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. There's some big players that are going to be way more powerful than any words that can help calm your body down and your partners. And so I want you to compare for a moment that when you're having conflict, in a lot of ways, you want to imagine that your partner is like a scared or angry dog. I'm not trying to be offensive in any way, But the reality is that we have, part of our brain is mammalian, and there's some things that we have in common with the mammalian brain. With the animalistic brain. So if you think about a dog that is stressed or angry, it's going to do one or two things. If you get too close, it's either going to bite you or it's going to run. So if you're trying to get close, you go slowly and you go low. So there's not a lot of verbalization, right? You don't want to do a lot of verbalization at first. You just want to calm your body down as much as you can, and then try to get physically close to them. The more skin contact, the better. So if you can hold a hand, if you can do a back rub, if you can do a back rub under the shirt with it still feeling safe, like you want to create skin to skin. There's been so much research about the power of skin to skin and calming the brain down and reducing pain. I mean, there's just so much research, but the reality is that your body is way more of a tool than your words in the initial stages of calming down conflict. Camilla, any other questions?
Yeah, I have two more questions. One of them is, how do I know how to distinguish between what things to address and what things to let go conflict-wise? And the other one is, how can we help ourselves and kids to offload stress without taking it out on one another and creating conflict with one another? Okay.
So in terms of figuring out what to pay attention to and what not to, it's almost like you want to, actually, you know what, I'm going to answer that question as we move through the slides, because as I go through the slides, there's one that specifically answers that. So let's kind of go through, this is kind of what I was talking about before, in that as you are in a calmed body, a calmer body, as calm as you can get it to be, again, you have filters, you're going to be able to see the gray. When you're in fight or flight, the brain thinks in black and white. You're for me or against me. You agree or you disagree. This is going to work or nothing's going to work. Like, it's black or white. It's all or nothing. That's not a personality flaw. It's a trait of the fight or flight system. And so if you're able to calm your body down and get out of fight or flight, you have a range of options in terms of being able to perceive this conflict that you can't in a stressed out body. You're going to be more flexible. You're going to be able to see the horizon. There's all sorts of benefits. So again, there's benefits for you and for them as we let these storms roll through. So there's two core techniques. So first, calm your body down. Second, seek proximity and let them be the ones to determine how close they want you to be. The biggest important thing is that you go as close as they'll let you go, and then you don't leave. What if as close as they want you to go is the doorway? That's okay, but stay in the doorway. Or what if it's just right next to them, but they don't want to be touched? That's okay, but stay next to them. What we tend to do is that we tend to kind of come up close, and then if it's not received well, we back all the way away. Neither one of those really allows the bodies, your body and theirs, to form a sense of connection. Because the number one neurochemical that's going to break down that conflict is oxytocin. We really want to build oxytocin. And oxytocin is the attachment, the bonding, the closeness neurochemical, and that's created when we feel connected with. So safe physical, calm the body down, safe physical proximity. If you can avoid moving the person in conflict, that tends to be better, unless they're willing to move themselves, which if they want to go on a walk with you, that's great, but trying to physically move somebody who is very fight or flight tends to backfire unless there's like serious danger going on. The other two are tuning in and alignment. So tuning in is honing into the core emotion that they're feeling. The core emotion, you're trying to not even pay attention to the context around that core emotion. You're just trying to hone in. And I want you to try to remember for a moment what it was like, if you even know any of this, it's been a long time ago, where you had to like physically tune into a radio station. And as you tuned in, you had to move your position to get to the right station. And so you're trying to tune in to the core emotion that they're feeling. And then when you're able to access that core emotion, then you get into this alignment. And alignment does not mean agreement. It has nothing to do with agreement. It doesn't have anything to do with condoning. You're not saying that anything's okay necessarily. Alignment has to do with, I'm here with you as you're feeling this. I'm here with you as you're feeling this. That I'm here with you is powerful. That's what creates oxytocin. That's one of the things. And as you create oxytocin, now you have a moment, now you're moving from, in that storm thing that we saw, you're moving from lightning into rain. And things are starting to progress and transition. And so in terms of how do you create, how do you teach your kids to do this? How do you do this with your partner without creating a lot of conflict? This is how you do it. You calm your body down. You seek proximity. You tune into the emotion. You're not trying to change the emotion. You're just trying to tune into it. Am I getting the right one? You're feeling scared. You're feeling this. You keep asking questions till you get a lot of yeses. And then you align. And you're like, I am here. I just want to be in this moment with you. I don't actually know how to fix any of it. That's actually a really helpful response in conflict. I don't know is a really good response sometimes, but I'm here. I don't know, but I'm here. I have no idea what to do with any of this, but I'm here. I'm here. And that's powerful. And then you want to let it rain, because what you'll see is what people will do is once they get to that sense of alignment and connection, then they'll kind of vamp it up a little bit in the sense of they'll really start talking it out. This is when people start getting more verbal. Yeah, I feel that way because of and you're kind of hoping, honestly, as a therapist, I'm always a little bit hoping that we get some tears in there, because tears are like the rain, right? We know it needs to rain because rain does a lot of really powerful things. It's nurturance to the soil. It clears out the energy in the air. It moves it back down into the ground, what's in front of us. It makes it tangible. And the important thing is that when it's raining, or if there's not any tears, there's just more verbalization, that you just follow their lead. You're not trying to correct them about what they should be sad about. You're not trying to change their perspective of anything. Let them be sad or mad or whatever. Let them be sad about whatever that is, because it's not going to be a permanent state. The thing that we know about storms is that they roll through. So whatever they're saying that they're sad about or mad about, just let them be the expert on where they feel like it needs to rain. Because the reality is that just the fact that you're following them, that you're tuned into the emotion, they feel connected with, and you're following their lead, that is changing the conflict. That's what change looks like. And it's starting to transition into something that can change that garden. So again, connection is built in the storms. It's enjoyed in the calm. And we already talked about this piece. Okay, questions.
We have a question that says, the slide presented on fight and flight, how might offloading work in a state of shock or freeze?
Okay, yeah, that's such a good question. Frozen is really tricky. Okay, so when we're talking about the fight or flight response, we go back to the analogy of the car. There's the brake, which is, okay, so imagine that the brake is like the fight or fight. I'm sorry, the gas. The gas is the fight or flight. Like it's revving up and it wants to fight or it wants to flee. It wants to go somewhere. The brake is like the calming centers of the brake. That's the parasympathetic that wants to kind of calm it all down. And the parking brake is the freeze. And I got this from one of my colleagues, Spencer Bradshaw. He kind of gives this analogy, and frozen is really hard. Frozen is like a really, really elevated level of lightning. And so when someone is frozen, when you're frozen, calming that body down becomes even more important. Like it might take longer for the body to calm down, longer for people to engage in safe physical proximity, and longer to transition into the rain. But when you're frozen, you definitely want to, it's really hard to make movement in any type of problem solving. And so that's why if you're recognizing that you're frozen or someone else is frozen, that's where some kind of other therapeutic techniques can be helpful, like grounding techniques. I mean, that's kind of a little bit more in the realm of trauma responses. And so I guess in essence, it's a matter of calming the body down enough that it becomes unfrozen, and then the other steps can occur. So the first step would be calming that body down, because it's going to be hard to engage the other steps in a frozen body. Okay, let me go through really quick just a few other slides, because I want to make sure we've got questions for the end. One thing that's just really important to be aware of is that knowing these steps and kind of like, we tend to skip this stuff. Like we tend to just go straight into the conversations before we've really addressed the physiology of what's going on. And just kind of recognizing that we tend to get in pretty fight or flight moments when our partners do, because their vulnerability can very much feel threatening to us. And that's a normal, like that's a natural response, because in some ways it is very threatening to us. You know, like when our kid throws a complete tantrum in the grocery store and we can't even get any food because we can't, you know, it's hard to manage them. Yeah, that's threatening. And so I just kind of want to validate why we get into fight or flight is that we are very much impacted by the offloading of our partners and our children. And at the same time, trying to just shut it down or turn against or turn away from it doesn't tend to move it through and get it to a place where the brain can be building resilience. And so just kind of want to validate that. And then going back to this heirloom garden, again, it's not about pulling, you don't pull stuff out. You can try, but it's going to take an incredible amount of energy, and chances are you're not going to see much impact. How you change a garden is that you infuse calm and connection into it. It's very much like how you grow a different carpet. It's all about competition, right? The things grow that get watered. And so weeds eventually, like big plants, just like you would in anything else. If a tree doesn't get watered or a plant doesn't get watered, even if it's got some pretty deep roots, it's going to be a little bit less, it's going to decrease its strength. It's going to decrease its presence within the relationship. And so as you move towards empathy, as you move towards engaging those responses, the calm your body, safe proximity, empathy, and getting that alignment and that tuning in, that infuses a new interaction within that fight or flight response. And that's very much like growing a new plant that you're going to be watering, instead of just going back into those old patterns that have been kind of the standard around conflict. And there's this whole physiology around memories and how memories are stored and how memories are changed that we won't really have time to go into. But the reality is that there's a rewiring process as conflict occurs, and instead of more fight or flight, it's re-experienced with empathy and with connection and with calmness in the body. It changes the way that stress response is stored in the brain. And like I said, there's this whole neurophysiology around it that we don't have time to go into, but I just want to kind of validate that this is a really powerful way of how you can change the brain and change some of those automated stress responses. So I think that we're about out of time. Other questions, Camille, because I want to make sure I leave at least 10 minutes for that.
Yeah, we do have a couple other questions. The first one I'll address part of, and then I'll let you know the other ones. So there's a question on whether or not the recording is going to be available. Yes. I'll be sending out the recording to everyone who registered. You'll get a link to, it's like it'll be like an unlisted link on YouTube. We also post the recording to our website. If you just go onto our website and look at, go to webinars, archive webinars, you can see all of our previous webinars there and watch them. As far as the slides being available, Stacy, I believe that's up to you. There's just some questions on whether or not you'd be open to sending out the slides.
Yeah, absolutely. If people are interested in that, just email me.
Okay.
Or Camille, you can email me, or whatever's the best setup for that is great.
Okay, I'll chat with you, and I will make sure tomorrow when I send out the recording that I'll send out the slides as well.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a couple questions on here. One of them is, how do we decide whose concern to address in the conflict? Who gets to reign?
Sorry, one more time.
So no, it's okay. How do we decide whose concern to address in conflict? Who gets to reign, like quote unquote, who gets to reign?
Yeah. And the reality, like the first thing, the most important thing you want to establish in conflict is always a sense of safety. So the number one thing that should always be the primary goal, whenever there's conflict, is how do I get my body and their body to feel safe with one another in the presence of conflict. The reality is, if that's not there, no other topic is going to get resolved. And the reality too is that conflict and heated moments are not really the time when solutions are found. Most often what happens is that high conflict moments is when the stress is offloading and people are needing connection. And if that connection can occur, a lot of stuff becomes pretty self resolving. If people can get to a place where they unloaded this conflict, they felt calm and connected with, how many times have you felt yourself deciding, oh, maybe what I was upset about wasn't that big of a deal? Like, oh, or maybe there's this other way of dealing with it after you've walked away from, a good engagement where you felt really safe and really connected to somebody. So I would almost say that it's not so much about figuring out who's going to rule or whose concerns are going to be the most heard. If people's bodies feel safe and connected to one another, there's going to be a much higher likelihood of stuff just self-resolving and kind of weeding itself out, and people being able to access their own logic instead of you having to convince them into it. If they've gotten that safety and connection in the interaction with you. And so I would say that it would be very difficult to like figure out who's going to kind of be the one to reign. I would say that, if both partners are flooded, then typically the one that is the less flooded is the one that tends to lead. That's another reason why you want to calm your body down, because guess what? Now you get to lead the conflict. Whoever is the calmest leads it. And so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the person's concerns that are addressed, but that is the one that moves into the leadership position. Any other questions?
Yes, so there's a question here that says, I'm going to guess what they mean, because I think there might be a typo, but what are some rewiring activities you can do, or like what's something you can do to help rewire?
Right. So it depends on the different situation. It's kind of like you want to strengthen your ability to actively push that neutral, the neutral in, the clutch in, that's going to get things to neutral so you can shift gears. So some concrete kind of things that tend to work pretty well: breathing patterns. There's something that's called cardiac coherence breathing. If you just YouTube that, cardiac coherence breathing, it's a specific type of breathing pattern that syncs your heart rate with your breathing and helps that fight or flight response to kind of calm down. So breathing patterns are always going to be good. Any type of meditation or mindfulness is going to strengthen the parts of your brain that help you get to a place where you can kind of, anytime you infuse calm into a stress association, that very process helps rewire it. And so getting very good at being able to activate calm, not in anybody else, in yourself at will, that's a very powerful rewiring tool. And meditation, mindfulness, breathing, all of those, just practicing those things consistently make it easier to do in moments of high conflict. Great questions. Any other questions? I wish I could see you guys.
I see one more question here, and we have 5 minutes. So if someone does have another question, we probably will have time for just one more after this one. But otherwise, we can do this one and close. But yeah, please feel free to ask more questions if anyone has any. How do you tap into empathy when the body is in fight or flight mode, otherwise known as like self-preservation mode?
Right. So again, it's kind of like going back into those steps. So it's really hard to access empathy in a very stressed out body. So first thing is calming the body down, which again might be through breathing. If you're in a space where you can move your body, you want to try to move your body, even if it's short, intensive, like a set of quick push-ups, or simple things like singing a song, like humming actually. So within the body, there's the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is connected to a lot of the parasympathetic response system. And one of the things that actually activates the vagus nerve is humming. So if you've ever seen the monks that they do like those meditative like hums, like they're activating like this whole part of their neural system. And so again, it can be quite difficult to activate empathy in a really stressed out body. So that's why you want to get first to that neurophysiology and try to move the body, breathe it. And then also, I think just recognizing that the conflict is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for connection. And getting away from that expectation that it shouldn't be here in the first place. I mean, I'm not saying that we should invite conflict necessarily, but the reality is that when it's there, the should or shouldn't, it's irrelevant. It's here. Whether or not it should be, it's here. And the only way to really get through it is to move through it. And the only way to change it is to infuse it with that calm and connection. Otherwise, the same patterns just continue to roll out. And it's tricky because then those neural patterns get reinforced again and again and again. And it can get, as you know, it can get pretty dicey. So I would say if you're having a hard time with empathy, go back and see if you can calm the body down and try to get a sense of connection with somebody. And there's other things to do if it's just you. But if it's an interpersonal thing, again, use that safe physical proximity.
Okay, I have 2 more questions.
Okay.
The first one is what if you don't want to be touched or your partner doesn't want to be touched, as far as working towards connection? What if neither of you want to be touched? And then the other question is, I'll give a little context. My wife won't talk to me anymore and she's seeking a divorce. I still have hope that things can be turned around. How can I get in the doorway and stay there, even if I can't even communicate with her?
Okay. So the first one is, what if no one wants to be touched? To be honest, that's very typical. You look at that, if a dog is sitting there with its, the hair on the back of it's like up, it probably doesn't want to be touched at first. And so that happens a lot. And again, you just want to you can absolutely have good conflict resolution from a distance, but distance is different than alone. And the main thing you want to avoid is alone. You can be in the doorway and that person can still be completely on your stage of them feeling attended to, and that you're fully present with them. and you're really trying to figure out that core emotion, you can do alignment and you can do tuning in from a distance. So my advice with that is just, again, just get as close as they'll let you be, but don't go further than you have to. And you do want to respect people's bubbles. I mean, if someone's saying don't touch me, you don't want to disregard that, because actually in them giving the boundary, that's them trying to establish safety with you. As they're pushing away, that's communication. It's not saying I don't care, it's saying I don't feel safe. And sometimes it's I don't care, sometimes it's a lot of things too, but one of the things it's communicating is that it wants you to be there. So as you're there, wherever that is, and you acknowledge that and you honor that, then it builds a sense of trust and safety. And in terms of the other, you know, when people are to that spot where they're looking for the divorce and they're not communicating, I don't think that there's like one answer necessarily. That it's definitely not like a catch-all that, you know, everyone's neurological wiring is so unique. But all I know is that whenever there's a chance for empathy, whenever there's a chance for tuning in and aligning, people tend to be responsive to that. Again, empathy is not, well, I've done a lot of work with some, like in residential treatment centers and things like that with adolescents that wanted nothing to do with me. You know, and that's how it goes when you're a therapist. It's like, that's the last place they want to be, and you're the last person they want to talk to. And so I learned very quickly that there's no benefit in trying to change their emotions. And I would tell them this. I said, you know, I'm not going to try to change how you feel about me. I'm going to honor that. I'm going to respect that. I'm going to let you be the expert on how you feel about me. And I just want you to know that I want to be here with you as you hate me. I want to be here with you as you want nothing to, like, I'm not going to fight that. I can accept that, but I still care about you. And I'm still here and I'm still open. If you have anything else to say about me and how you feel about me, I'm here. And that statement of just like, I'm here. I don't know how to fix everything that is stressing you out. And I really have no idea what the long-term solutions are. I just want to be here in this moment with you. Sometimes that's one of the most powerful things you can say to someone is, I just want to be here in this moment with you. In essence, I think that's what empathy is. Empathy is not encouragement. It's not sympathy. It's I'm here. I'm just here with you. I think we're up on time. Yeah, Camille, is there anything else? Like, are we about done with time?
Yeah, we are done on time. Or we got to wrap up. I saw there was a couple more questions in the chat, but we don't have time to get to them. But I can send, along with the slides and the recording, I can send your email address.
Yeah, please.
So that people can reach out with questions that weren't answered.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, just as mentioned, recording will be available. I'll send all the info tomorrow. You'll get it via email. And if you want to get a CEU, we have one, this webinar is approved for one CEU by the Utah Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. So if you want the credit, you can fill out the survey that pops up when you exit out. It's the last question down there, and it'll ask you a couple questions just to verify your who you are, and then we'll send you a certificate. So, and yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Jones. This was
welcome.
Fabulous. We're so happy to have you here again. I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat just saying thank you so much, and wanting to let you know how excellent this presentation has been.
Yeah.
You're the best.
I don't know about that, but thank you for your time. You know, I mean, there's 1,000 places you guys could be right now, you know, and I just, anytime I ever have a chance to talk about attachment and connection to people, it's so meaningful to me, because for me, it's like, it's the heartbeat of life. Like, this is what we care about, right? I mean, our jobs and everything else, but man, our people, our attachments, that's where it's at. So I just value your time, and thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I love listening to you. Like, I just absolutely love it. So calming. How ironic, right? Or not ironic, but how on brand.
Right.
But yeah, so I hope everyone has a great evening, great Wednesday, I believe it is.
Awesome.
And hope to see you all at another webinar. And Dr. Jones, hope we could keep this relationship up and have you present again
Sure.
in the future, later
Okay.
on, some
Later
point.
on. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. See you guys. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.